Genesis, beginnings. Exodus, the way out. Leviticus, the manual for priests. Numbers, the census. Deuteronomy, the law retold to a second generation, to a new generation, the second law. We're going to start going through Genesis. Or has been more in the past. It's not as in vogue lately because some of the things that people said have been proven otherwise. People said, "Oh, there was no writing in Moses' day," and that's been proven false. There is a classic thing called the documentary hypothesis, which claimed to break up the Pentateuch into 4 different authors, and this part was written by this guy, and this part was written by this guy, and this part is written by this guy, and it is a bunch of baloney in my opinion. They have even taken articles written by some of the people writing articles about that and broken their articles up using the same type of criticism, showing that their articles were written by lots of people. So this will be up on the website. There are lots of different places in the Pentateuch where in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, Jesus speaking, other New Testament speakers and writers, where it's referred to as Moses doing it. I have no problem with that. I think it is. I think it's easy. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Bible just assumes God. Doesn't try to prove it. Doesn't mess around. It could have gone through a big explanation and this and that, and just assumes it. God created Bera from nothing. God is not subject to time. We understand now that time and space and matter are related, and he is not subject to his creation. That time is part of what he created. And that's the plural. Fascinating quote from a rabbi who was talking about the 6th section of Leviticus. Come and see the mystery of the word Elohim. There are 3 degrees, and each degree by itself alone, and yet notwithstanding, they are all one, and joined together in one, and not divided from each other. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And we understand. The Hebrew people would talk about a royal we, as it were, a majesty in the plural. We see an evidence of the Trinity. An amazing evidence of the Trinity.
But what plural would they, since they believe that God is one, what plural would it be?
They would just say that God refers to himself in the plural as an expression of majesty. Just like the royal we. That kind of thing. Us, that kind of thing. Character of God is even revealed in Genesis 1:1. It assumes the existence. It assumes his eternity. He's before everything. It implies that he's omnipotent. He creates the universe of things. It implies his freedom. He starts the course of action. It implies his infinite wisdom. An order of matter and mind can only come from a being of absolute intelligence. It implies his goodness, because he has no reason, motive, or capacity for evil. It presumes him to be outside, to be beyond all limit of time and place, because he is before all time and place. Merely translated, the earth, but, instead of and, the earth became without form and void. And that's a reasonable translation. This saying that there was an original creation, the heavens and the earth, and then it became without form and void, does have an advantage in the sense of it allows time for angels to be created and for Satan to fall. That's a hard thing to place in a timeline otherwise, because you already have the serpent in the Garden of Eden. You already have a fallen Satan in the Garden of Eden, and if he hasn't fallen already, so where does that happen? So this gives a who knows how long period of time where it could have done. However, it became without form and void. So in essence, everything was reset, completely reset. So it's not, you can't really talk about that being, okay, so that's where the old universe would be looked at, because it became without form and void, everything was reset. It's a possibility. Not a crucial issue. Makes sense to me, but This is, of all the things not to hill to die on, this is one of them. This is more speculation. It's an interesting thought, but not that. So we have the days of creation that God goes through, and he declares after each one that it was good. You have the light created, the darkness and the light separated. It's obviously poetic language. This could infer, for example, the establishment of the laws of physics. It could, the overall underlying structure. The second one, you have the firmament, and you have the waters below from the waters above. Do we understand exactly what that is? No. It's like many commentators will talk about the firmament being the atmospheric heavens. They'll talk about a water canopy on the earth, and there's lots of reasons that scientifically that could make sense, but there is some speculation in that, and we have to be careful. The third one, the dry land separated from the sea, and we have the grass and the herbs and the trees. Fascinating little thing. It's double blessed. The third day is double blessed, seen as double good, and so you have a lot of Jewish weddings are held on Tuesday because it's the double good day, the double blessed day. Because first he saw the dry land, said that was good. Then he saw the plants, said that was good. Next day, the sun, moon, and stars. They were made, not created. It made from existing material. The word changes. It's not the bara. It's the word that, or placed is another way of looking at that. Maybe they were just moved into position. Next day is the water creatures and birds. And finally, the sixth day, the land animals and man. Then he rested. Not that he was tired, but he ceased from his labor. Cool things to look at. We were made in the image of God. Male and female, he made them. When he's referring to that. It takes both sexes to represent God. It takes all of us to represent the nature of God. Each of us have a part of that picture. We were created male and female by design. This is not something that you can choose. The Sabbath. The Sabbath day, God rested. Nothing new was created. He established a covenant with Israel that they should keep the Sabbath through all generations. The church gathered typically on the first day of the week, although there are notes of them doing some gatherings on the Sabbath. When they were going into a new area, they'd go down and get with the Jewish congregation on the Sabbath. But typically the church gathered on the first day of the week. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, and he puts it in a different way, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so it is good for us to rest. It is good for us to come to Jesus, and he will give us rest. But it is not something that we have to have that level of legalism about. And indeed, there are various scriptures where don't let someone judge you whether or not you keep the Sabbath. Some people do, some people don't. There was a big thing at that time. You had Jewish believers, you had Gentile believers, and the Jewish believers would say, well, you got to keep Sabbath. And they enjoyed that time of rest and fellowship and family. And the Gentiles of believers say, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? It's just another day. And so we have, don't hassle each other about it. It's okay either way. And Jesus is our rest. The work is finished. We are righteous in God before him, in him. There was a big discussion in Acts 15 about whether you needed to keep the law of Moses to be saved. And they worked it all out. Peter said, no, look, I've been told all food is kosher. And Paul is saying, see what's happening to me. I'm going here and here and here, and God is doing these amazing things. And so they clearly determined that it was not true that you needed to keep the Sabbath, keep the Jewish law to be saved. So chapter 1, there we go. That's how quickly we're moving through this. And again, it is really wonderful. But again, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish, over the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So made in the likeness of God. Now that actually has a real important subtext. And that is that all humans are made in the likeness of God and are therefore important and precious. Even people before they come to Christ. Even people that are really messed up and not doing well. Chapter 2, we have the poetry of chapter 1. Chapter 2 goes into details. And it introduces a new section, specifically beginning at verse 4, where it talks about, there's several new sections in Genesis in 10 different times that uses a phrase like there's the generations of, or the genealogy of, or the history of. Introduces a different section. So now it's introducing a different section, and it's going to be going and using that Hebrew logic. It's going to now be taking a deeper look at man, in particular in the creation of man. It's not just a retelling, it's an enlargement on aspects. As it goes through this, the language changes as well, which is why some people have said, oh, that means it's a different author. No, it's a difference in how God is relating to man and God how is relating to the creation. It also can mean that Moses, especially when it came to things like the creation account, was using different documents handed down to him, was using oral records and bringing together different things and recording them accurately. Observations. In chapter 2, it talks about, here's these rivers, the name of this river and this river and this river, and here they are and this and that. And they have familiar names like Euphrates. But it wasn't going to be the same rivers because after a global flood, that's all washed out. And so, but Noah probably used some of the same names. Why not? It's like, okay, I don't have an old Euphrates. Here, I'll use this one. Interesting that there was no rain before the flood, that there was a mist that came up. This is another reason why a water canopy over the earth makes a lot of sense. If there was a water canopy over the earth, you would see different changes. You would see a higher atmospheric pressure, which would allow things to happen that are not currently explainable. For example, the pterodactyl. The pterodactyl should not have been able to fly. Its wings weren't big enough unless it had a higher air pressure. Higher air pressure, and we do things to heal people. We put them in a chamber and lift the air pressure to heal them. It was a great place to be. You'd expect larger plants, larger animals. You would expect better healing. You'd expect longer lives. You'd expect better shielding from cosmic rays. You'd also expect earlier DNA to be even better, and then the DNA would get corrupted over time. Different types of plants and animals. The chapter 2, it talks about God made. The order is different. It says, you have the man, and then you have plants and animals, and then you have woman. And in the first chapter, you have plants and animals, then you have man and woman. So the order is a little bit different. You go, what? Well, no, it isn't just that modern man is smarter and we've noticed something that the Hebrew people didn't know for thousands of years. It's that the names are different, the words are different. It's domesticated plants and animals. It's cattle, not just critters. And so it's domesticated plants and animals that God did a special work with those. And when Adam named the plants and animals, if you read it carefully, he didn't have to name all the animals. Probably 100 different kinds or something like that. He named a large grouping, but it's reasonable that he could do it in a day. Now God created, when he created a bunch of different animals, he would create them 2 by 2 quite often, and they were understood to be of the same. But he did a special thing with man. Took a piece out of Adam to make Eve. Whether that was DNA, it was a curved, the literal word is like a curved piece, called a rib. It could have been a rib. But the point I think that God was making was that this was part of Adam, that this was absolutely the same kind. This wasn't a new kind of critter. This was the same kind of critter. And it became a huge point when we talk about marriage. Matthew Henry was the source of the quote that I'm sure you guys have heard at various times. He made of a rib out of the side of Adam, not out of his head to rule over him, or his feet to be trampled upon him, by his side to be equal with him, under his arm to be protected, and near his heart to be beloved. I like that quote. The union of man and woman was directly designed by God. Marriage and the union was directly designed by God. The man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh, is quoted 3 times in the New Testament. It's a very important understanding. It's a very important thing for us to get. Each of us, man and women, receive a suitable companion, ideally fulfilling each other's needs. Chapter 3. The fall. Satan comes along, the great serpent. It can actually be translated dragon as well, which makes sense if you have the curse. He ends up crawling on the ground. He could have had legs before. Satan used partial truths to facilitate his deceptions. Eve was deceived. Adam chose to disobey. Adam had the worse sin, as it were. God said, "You shall die. Dying, you shall die." Literally. Death was the primary result of disobeying God. All evil, all suffering, all bad things flow from Satan's deception and the fall. The old question, how could bad things happen to good people? It's the fall. Everything flows from the fall. As a result of the fall, we have the curse. To the woman, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." The guys had other stuff. "Because you have heeded the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground." You're going to have a big problem working. "And you shall eat the herbs of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. Dust to dust." So this whole curse came as a result of the fall. And the whole, men and women were treated differently in this curse. One thing we'll talk about at One Accord is what exactly this means and why it was different, and what does that mean to have, in each of these cases. But I want to point out that the curse highlights that difference between men and women. That we are different even as every individual is different. But in some ways there's some things that can be as groups with wide variations. If we were all alike, though, there would be no need for both of us. If you married someone exactly like yourself, it's not as good as, And indeed, in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives with a sacrificial love, given different levels of instruction. And for wives, respect and honor your husbands. Basically, believe in him. Can't tell you how much guys want that. Just on a passing, there's a cool guy, Mark Gungor. He's a pastor and a comic. He has a YouTube channel, has some various things you can get. He's a guy that has the routine that describes how men think versus how women think. That men, we think in compartmentalized boxes, and we take a topic and we look at it and we examine it, then we put it away. And the rule is that no box can touch any other box. And our favorite box is the box which drives women crazy. It's the nothing box. There is nothing in it. And we love to go to our nothing box. It's our favorite box. That's why men can do things like fishing for hours on end, and we can just be relaxed and we can be thinking about nothing. Whereas for women, it's a bunch of wires and everything's connected. Everything is connected to everything. And there's no such thing as one box. It's all connected. And so both of them, you put the two things together, and it's better than either one by itself. Anyway, Mark Gungor, he does a great job with it, and lots of other topics. He's got a great marriage ministry. Strongly recommend it. In continuing on, Satan was cursed by God. Notice that as soon as man fell, as part of the curse, God was already promising the Messiah. He was already promising the redemption. That you're cursed more than all cattle. On your belly you shall go and you shall eat dust all your life. And I think there was probably a spiritual aspect to that as well. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. Seed, singular. That's why the translation capitalized it. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Already a subtle hint at the virgin birth. Last I checked, women had eggs, men had seed. Already a thing of the virgin birth. Already an understanding of a promise of the Messiah. They were driven from the Garden of Eden as an act of love. It was not a punishment. It was an act of love. That God drove them out of the garden. They had eaten of the wrong fruit, of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. And we'll talk tomorrow about why, what that means and why that could be good or bad. But God prevented Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of life so that they wouldn't be trapped forever in sin. So that he could have his plan of redemption. So they wouldn't live forever in that state, but that he could redeem them. And he went to great lengths to prevent them from doing it. Established the flaming sword and the cherubim. Chapter 4, we have the story of Cain and Abel. How many people were alive at the time of Cain and Abel? We don't know. Doesn't say. The Bible only tells us the genealogy things that matter in terms of the line of the Messiah or the line of kings or specific events. It doesn't tell us the entire genealogy. Adam and Eve could have had kids before. We do know that they had after quite a few. And Cain in particular gives us hints that there were quite a few by the time Cain killed his brother. Hebrews 11:4 helps us know what had happened, that Abel offered in faith, Cain did not. Hard to understand just from the text. The text just says that Abel, had a critter and he was raised livestock. Cain had plants and he offered that. They both looked fine. But obviously they had more of an understanding than we give them credit for. And indeed, you see hints of that throughout the Old Testament. You see places where Noah knew what clean and unclean animals were before the law of Moses had declared it. You see various hints that they had more information than what we think that they might have understood. And so Cain and Abel offered in faith. Cain did not. And also the message is that we love each other and don't hate others who are better. Cain was depressed and angry when he decided to kill his brother. That is the wrong time to make important decisions. When you're depressed and angry is not a good time to make decisions. It gives you a warped perspective. How did Cain know that his offering was not accepted? We don't know for sure. There's a special interaction with God. There are various examples of accepted offerings being burnt up, but he obviously knew somehow. Why was it rejected? We don't know for sure. Lots of opinions. We know that the one was brought in faith, the other not. That Abel brought the best of the firstborn, a blood offering, which could be a type of Christ, a sin offering. The Hebrew text can be read to mean that Abel brought a grain offering and the firstborn offering. But Cain brought of his fields not the best or the first, just brought some of his stuff. And it says that afterwards Cain went to the land of Nod. The Nod means wandering, choosing a nomadic style. Notice that Cain also talks about, somebody will kill me. Well, that means there were other people at the time. We don't know how many. Could be hundreds of thousands if you do the math. It's really interesting. We just don't know. If you figure, though, that Adam and Eve were born fully grown, and they didn't have television or contraceptives, so might have popped someone out every year, and then they popped people out, and they popped people out. It's possible that they had quite a few. Eve saw Seth as a possible fulfillment of a Messiah. She said, I've been given a child, even the Lord. literally. Chapter 5, a bunch of names, genealogy. This guy, born here, he lived this long, had a kid, lived this long, and died. Over and over again, that pattern repeated. I believe that God does this so that we see it as history, not a story. That he's putting a ground that this is real people, real history. It limits this genealogy to be an actual linear list without gaps. They were very important to establish the faithfulness of God in the lineage of Jesus, the Messiah. Notice that the Jewish people don't have a good genealogy now. They can't say what tribe they're from. Enoch, he walked with God, and then he was taken. Funny little thing. Noah's also listed as walking with God. You have three groups: the ones that perished in the flood, preserved through the flood, or taken before the flood. If taken before the flood, Enoch is a type of the church, then could be a picture of the rapture. He was a prophet and a preacher. Methuselah, his death shall bring, is what that meant. What a horrible thing to name your kid. Oldest man in the Bible, yet died before his father. Great Bible quiz question. He died in the year of the flood because his father was Enoch and he was taken, so he hasn't died. So Methuselah died before his father. Hebrew tradition says that he came within 7 days. The grace of God delayed the flood. It's interesting that Methuselah was the oldest in the Bible. In this genealogy, in the meaning of the names of each of these people, is hidden the entire gospel. You have this whole genealogy, and if you put it all together and read it as a sentence, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching, and his death shall bring the despairing rest. You can't tell me that a bunch of Jewish rabbis conspired to hide the gospel in the first part of Genesis. Father, thank you for the truth of your word. Thank you, Lord, for pointing us to Jesus over and over in every which way. Lord, help us understand your word, what you do and why you do it, as we grow in you. In Jesus' name, amen.